Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Mosaic podcast. Today, I don't even know how I bumped into this guy, but as soon as I saw him, I must have seen him on someone else's podcast or some conference that he was speaking at or something. I really don't know where the place was, and it really isn't important because in the world that I live in, this idea of a mosaic connecting pieces just connects people to people. And I'm always open to when a connection comes or when I feel somebody come into my life. I always want to pursue it and see what's going on further in it. So it was a sheer pleasure when I reached out to him and I said, will you come on my podcast? Because he's not an unknown person. And a lot of people that are pretty well known say, well, I don't know, what's your listenership? What's this? What's that? He didn't ask any of those questions. He just said, sure, I'd love to do that. And I love when people are like that because even if I have a great listenership, I just sent a note to somebody and they said, well, what's your listenership? Because I'm really very busy. I said, it's probably not your podcast. And I have a good listenership. It's not that I don't have a good listenership. I just don't like that people do it for that reason. So I already love this guy that I'm going to interview. Let me give you a little backdrop on him because I'm not great on bios, but his bio is interesting enough that I want to talk about it, and the work he's doing is interesting enough that I want to take a second to bring it up in front of us so we know where we're coming from here. His name is Steve Farber. Hey, Steve. He is ranked on Inc.'s global top 50 leadership and management experts list. I don't know what he did to do that. He's got to be pretty damn good to be a
I don't know either.
But if you look at the people that he's spoken to, I don't know if there are any companies left for him to find anymore. He's spoken to some of the largest companies in the world and been with those companies. We're doing work with them. Amazing list of people that he's worked with. He's also a Wall Street Journal best-selling author and founder and CEO of the Extreme Leadership Institute. His first book, The Radical Leap, A Personal Lesson in Extreme Leadership, was named one of the 100 best business books of all time. All time is a long time.
That's a very long time.
That's a long time, dude.
It's a great title for a list.
It's a great title for a list. His new book is what really intrigues me. It's called Love is Just Damn Good Business and has been listed by Book Authority as one of the top business strategy books of 2020. He says promoting love is just damn good business. And he offers a leap assessment at a website called www.loveisgoodbiz.com. That'll be on the show notes. Let me just tell you a little bit about the book, and then we're going to just go to the horse's mouth himself because we have him right here, okay? Here's what he says. It's time to toss aside the touchy-feely notions of love and business and recognize the real power it holds. Love is not only appropriate in the context of business, it's the foundation of great leadership, and therefore the very foundation of a thriving, competitive enterprise. When love is part of an organization's framework and operationalized in its culture, employees and customers feel genuinely valued. Employees who are passionate about the work that they do are more loyal, innovative, creative, and inspiring. And that translates to greater customer experience. They don't serve others out of an obligation, but because of a genuine desire to improve people's lives. And when customers reciprocate by loving your products, your services, and your people, that's when something great really happens. That's when you get loyalty. That's when you get raving fans. It's a refreshing human way of doing business. His website is www.stevefarber.com. His other website is www.extremeleadership.com. Those will both be in the show notes as well as his social media links. It's time to stop this monologue that I'm carrying on with myself and say to you, Steve Farber, welcome to the Mosaic Podcast, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Danny. It's a pleasure to be here with you, regardless of what your listenership is. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. How are you?
I'm great. I spend a lot of time on my ass nowadays. for a guy that's used to traveling all over the place. I know I'm certainly not alone in that, but I'm making a lot of connection in this ironic electronic means of communicating, and I mean it's ironic because the physical distance is actually creating greater connections among people. For example, I don't know that you and I would have connected if these were so-called normal circumstances.
Yeah. And let me just put that in context. He probably lives about 20 miles away from me.
Yeah, right down the street.
Right. So I live in North County of San Diego. He lives in the city of San Diego, in a great town, in a great little town. So, but what's beautiful about this, and I'm finding this also in the people that I'm talking to and interviewing, is I have another podcast called 50 Conversations with 50 Strangers. And I've had conversations with people on every continent of the globe. When I finished the Mosaic, I was thinking that I was going to get in a VW bus and travel around the country, or travel around the world, and sit on street corners and talk to people and just listen to people, because I wanted to do what Mo did. But I'm not able to do that now. But I am able to do it through this Zoom room, where magical things are happening.
It's quite remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. So let me go back a little bit. I always like to ask this question to start off the podcast. I don't know why, but it elicits sometimes amazing jumping off place. What did your parents do?
So my mother was a housewife, I guess was the term we used to use. But I'm taking an educated guess on that because she died when I was 8 years old.
Wow.
My father spent his life in the time that I was alive. Anyway, he was around 50 when I was born, so he had been through a couple of careers by that point. But he was in the insurance business, and hated it, as far as I could tell.
Wow.
So, yeah, nothing. Certainly, no, starry-eyed kinds of careers there.
And yet, how, like if you think about what psychology says, whether it's right or not, doesn't matter. We'll just use it as the basis of the opening of the question. That the first 6 years really determine a lot about the way we live our life, and it puts a lot of the ground rules and the foundations of how we think. So if you think about the first 6 years, the first 8 years, losing your mother at 8 years old,
yeah,
having a father that seemed to hate the work that he was doing, in what context were you brought up? When you look back on it now, what do you see in that created the person you are today?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things, and I don't know that it would fall within the first 6 years, but certainly in those formative years, because in my formative years I lost my mother, right? So, and I was the youngest. I have a sister who's 7 years older, and my brother is 9 years older. He passed away a few years ago, but when I was born, I was like, oh, look what we got. A bit of a surprise here. And like I already said, my father was close to 50 years old. So I grew up as the baby. And my earliest memories were all very fond memories. I mean, I had a great family. I'm very tight with my siblings. And I was very close with my father. And when my mother died, there was a generational thing at the time, because I'm 62 years old now. So when I was 8, this was in Chicago, at least in my family, they felt it was their responsibility to protect the little ones from the evil world. So I didn't even know that I knew my mother was sick because she was in and out of the hospital, but I didn't know that she was terminal. And the day that I found out that she died, my father told me that she died, was the first time I had ever even heard that was a possibility. So it was completely out of nowhere, and within an instant, I was the little kid whose mom died. And fortunately, I had very loving family, and we lived in a little neighborhood in suburban Chicago, and the parents of my friends and all that, they were all very nurturing to me. So what happened for me is, and I've thought about this in retrospect before, I grew up feeling like I was different, but not different as in odd or different in any kind of with any kind of negative connotation. I was the kid who people cared about because of the circumstance that he was in. And I think it really shaped me. I always felt I felt a little special in an unusual kind of a way. Even though, of course, I had deep grief, and it was quite a challenge to try to sort it all out. I wasn't even permitted to attend my mother's funeral.
Wow.
Because their thought was that it would be too traumatic for a little kid. So and it all came from a loving place, misguided as it was, and that really, I believe that had an impact on me. I've always been very comfortable with people. I'm a social animal. I love being around people. I love being around people that I love. I love being around friends. So that's been the biggest challenge in the COVID era. Is I just want to go hang out with my friends and play music and hug people.
Yeah.
That's really all I want to do. So I think a lot of that was formed in those early days.
So in that environment where you were cared for and loved and watched over and protected, did you feel encased in something? Did you ever feel like, I just want to spread my wings and see the world? Was there ever a moment in your life where you said, enough protection already? I'm a big boy now, or I'm an adult now, or whatever it is. Or do you still feel like the world sort of protects you and takes care of you?
Oh, I never felt like there was a bubble or a cocoon or anything like that around me. I just felt supported, I think is probably the best way to say it. My father was very supportive. He was supportive of me, and my interests. But interestingly, because I was 7 years younger than my sister, there came a time pretty soon. I mean, all through middle school and high school, it was just me and my dad.
Wow.
So I spent a lot of time alone because he was working. I'd come home from school and feed myself and take care of myself and watched a hell of a lot of TV. Oh, man. And I still do. I could trace a lot of it back to those days. It's a bit of an addiction. But anyway, so I spent a lot of time alone, but I also had very close friends. So it was an interesting kind of a dynamic where I felt okay being on my own, and I had a very independent streak. I left home. I graduated high school a semester early. I was, I think, just turned 17, and I left home. I went to live with friends in New York at
Wow.
17 years old, and my father was not happy about that. But when he saw I was determined to do it, he supported me as best he could muster. So yeah, man, I've been on my own for a long time.
Wow. So for those of you who are listening, I want you to join in and be a part of the conversation and just listen to some of the things that Steve is saying. And I listened to him because I also lost my parents, and I had a very different view of the world. Even though I was completely supported, I don't think I felt completely supported. I felt a real absence of this love that I felt, of this unconditional love that my mom and dad alone could give me. And I didn't feel that in unconditional love in the world. And it was my search for that love that's propelled me through most of my life. But I want you to see, even in the conditions where Steve's talking about, of how he felt completely supported. Then a few sentences later, he said, but my dad worked and my sisters were gone and I was pretty much home alone. How many of you would look at that situation and say, I felt completely supported? And what was it in the support that you felt? Because clearly it wasn't in the physical closeness of being with somebody, because you were alone a lot. And when you had the opportunity to leave, you jumped ship and went to see your friends in New York.
Yeah.
And your dad didn't support that. So where, like, paint for me the picture of the support that you felt and how that feels that was seemingly beyond the proximity of support. Like,
Yeah.
I bet
Yeah.
there
No,
are a
it's a
lot of
great.
people listening that are
That's a
saying,
great question, and it came from two particular places. One is my relationship with my father was always really good, and he was emotionally supportive, even though he was out trying to earn a living, and struggling in that process. But he was very supportive of me in from that level of believing in me, spending time with me as he could, and it was always good time. We used to go out for breakfast before school in the morning,
right,
that kind of a thing. I have very fond memories of that. Actually, most of the time I spent with my dad revolved around going to restaurants, which is why I still love to go out to eat.
yeah, that's cool.
But the other source of my support was from my friends. So from a very young age, from the time I was about 9, I'm going to say, or even younger, I always had a very strong and wonderful network of friends, and a lot of it came from the summer camp experience.
Yeah,
I have friends that I met at camp that when I was 10 years old, 9 years old, that are still some of my closest friends today. And that network just kind of grew as I got older. I had more and more really good friends. So back then, it was spending, even though I was spending a lot of time alone, I was a lot of time on the phone talking with my friends.
okay.
And then every weekend, that's all I would do is hang out with them. And that nourished me, and it still does.
So I'm going to lob something over the net, and it's not to defrock your story or to do anything. It's just to better understand it, if I could.
Yeah.
Would it be fair to say, because of the situation that happened, obviously your dad had to go and work. He had to make a living to support you and to support your sister and brother too, who for whatever way he was giving to that, and he was struggling to do that. So he had to work harder and harder to do that. So he wasn't necessarily available. But it wasn't necessarily the amount of time that he spent with you as much as the time that he did spend with you and what he was able to give you. But then you created, is it fair to say you created your network of support around that which would nourish you in the way you needed to be nourished because there wasn't somebody with you all that time?
I don't know. It's an interesting question. I've never really thought about it that way. It all just grew so naturally and organically, and I think it's because I'm by nature a very social person. Some people it's hard for them to make friends. They feel awkward around other people. I've never been that person.
Yeah.
Not that I'm a raging extrovert. In fact, I'm a bit of an introvert in crowds of people that I don't know, which is a little bit odd because I'm on stage a lot. But I just always, it was just like taking in nourishment, like drinking really great cool water, and it made every typical childhood challenge that much easier to deal with.
So, so I know you speak on stages, and I know you give good advice to people through. I'm assuming you give good advice to people through the talks that you give, or things that
Well, I
people.
like to think so.
Right, I would like to think so too, and I get a good feel for you here. Um, and even some of the questions you ask people to consider, I'm sure would be questions to consider. And I'm sorry for sitting on this point, but it just seems so interesting because I think there's so many people that are listening right now that, especially in this moment of time with COVID here, don't feel the proximity of support that they want,
Yes, true.
and don't feel. I mean, my daughter is developmentally delayed, and so lives in a group home of her choosing, and I haven't been able to see her now for almost 6 months. We talk every day on FaceTime, but I just miss her, the proximity of just giving her a hug and being with her and just
Yeah.
having her here. Um, and I'm sure people are watching their elder parents in hospitals and not being able to go there and be with them. I'm wondering if there's something in your experience of growing up without proximity but still feeling support that you might be able to share with people in this moment, particularly. that would allow them to still feel loved and supported, nurtured? Is there something you did? Is there something people gave you? Is there a new way you discovered to feel that support?
Yeah, I want to first of all, Danny, I want to thank you for that question because it's I've never considered that before. Because it was, I mean, throughout my childhood, it was a constant oscillation between being alone and an oscillation between isolation and physical connection. Because, and the reason is that most of my close friends lived elsewhere. So it wasn't like I went to school every day and was surrounded by a whole community of friends. Because my deep friendships were built at summer camp.
Yeah, camp friends.
They lived, most of them lived, a half an hour drive from me, 20 minutes to a half an hour drive from me. They went to different schools. And I had a couple of friends in high school, but I wasn't really a social animal in high school. So I did have more or less an isolated experience during the week. And then on the weekends, my dad would drive me into Evanston and Skokie, where all my friends lived, and I'd spend the entire weekend there. And then I'd come home on Sunday, basically. Yeah. So I did grow up vacillating between total immersion in my community of friends and then pulling back. So and then of course in the summers, this is when I was growing up, during that camp time, it was total immersion for a couple of months. Yeah. And then the feeling of separation, coming back home and feeling homesick for camp, that kind of a thing. Yeah. So it was a constant back and forth, which I think to some degree does make this time that we're going through right now deep in my DNA. I have some of that flexibility. But what kept me going in those times of separation, which I think is the an important part of what you're asking for folks nowadays, is I never severed the connection because the physical proximity wasn't there. Yeah. So back then, there was really only one way to do that, or two ways to do that. One was on the phone, and the other was by mail. Wow. For people that live farther away, right? So I spent hours and hours on the phone with my friends every day. And then for folks that live farther away, getting a letter from a buddy living on the other side of the country was like gold, man. Yeah. It was just a wonderful thing. So for now, in these times where the vast majority of us are faced with, as you just described, physical separation from loved ones and friends, I think that's why I think Zoom and its ilk are so important. Yeah. Because, man, if I were able to connect back then, if I were able to connect with my friends on video as well as that would have been it would have been amazing.
Well, Dick Tracy had a watch that we were,
I know,
right? And we thought, no, that's just
I'm like all cars.
That's right. So,
yeah. I watched a lot of Dick Tracy back in those days.
Yeah, who didn't? It was just our time. And I'm sure there are millennials that are listening that are going, what world did they grow up? Were there dinosaurs running around? Because, the thought of being on the phone or writing a letter or,
yeah.
I mean, it's like, or not having some sort of social media interaction blows their minds.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's my favorite question to get asked by some of our younger brethren and sisters is, hey, what was your favorite computer game when you were a kid?
Right. We didn't have computers.
My answer to that is Etch-a-Sketch.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Let me ask you a sort of a strange question. Because a lot of what we've been talking about is this idea of maintaining a connection when even amongst the distance, even through the distance. It's going to sound strange, but I just felt to ask it. You can just say no, and we go on to the next question, okay?
No.
Okay. Next question?
Go ahead.
Did you ever try and feel that, or did you ever feel that without trying to feel that? That connection to your mom, even though she passed away and wasn't here? that there was still that connection of her presence in your life that you could feel, that would be the ultimate sort of extension of, though they're not close to me, I still feel them, and I can't write them a letter and I can't call them on the phone, but I can connect to them another way.
Yeah, with my mother, no. I think maybe it was because of my young age. I was overcome with the questions that I think most children ask. It's like, well, where is she? Where did she go? Is she in heaven? Where is heaven? That kind of thing. With my father passed away when I was about 22, I guess. And that, I felt that loss because, he and I were very close, as I said. But other than, vivid dreams from now and then, I wouldn't say that I felt the presence. Now, with my brother, who passed away now 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, that connection is something I feel very strongly, like pretty much all the time. So I don't know if it's a function of a greater maturity or awareness, or just that we had more time together on this planet.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I definitely feel that differently from others who have gone.
It's just so interesting because I had the privilege is going to be a big word to say because it was a painful privilege of watching my first wife pass away, and she got breast cancer, and then she also got a second leiomyosarcoma in her abdominal area, and that was painful. I mean, excruciatingly painful. And you could time an event on it. She would go through 45 minutes of blood-curdling, screaming pain for 45 minutes, every 45 minutes, 45 minutes on, 45 minutes off, all day, all night.
Unbelievable.
And so I was laying next to her in the bed when she took her last breath. And the startling reality of seeing a body that was, even though it was riddled with pain, but was fluid and movable, and to a body that just became stiff and rigid. You couldn't even move the arm. You would break it if you moved it. Made me sort of realize that we can't be just this body, because that thing that's inside of this body is what gives this body life. Did you ever have any experience like that?
Yes, with my brother.
With your brother?
Yeah, so I was with him when he passed, me and 13 or 14 other people.
Wow.
Yeah, I made it. He lived in Chicago, and I made it there in time to spend a couple of days with him before he passed away. And they converted his hospital room into a hospice situation. So we had lots of people, friends, relatives in the room with him. It was a remarkable experience. It was really incredibly spiritual. It was, I got a chance to say goodbye. I got a chance to play music for him. He was always my biggest fan. I got a chance to wish him well on his journey. And, one of the things, over the couple of days that I was there, he lost his ability to speak. And he was in a chair at the end. We brought him his favorite, most comfortable kind of reclining chair. And he was lying in his chair. He was unresponsive. And I was just sitting next to him, and I was talking in his ear. And I said, hey, just do me a favor. Do me one favor. Let me know when you get there.
Wow.
And there was this, he was lying perfectly still, and there was this ripple through his body. And it was like he was mustering the energy to respond, and he gave me one definitive nod like that.
Wow.
It was very powerful. And I have to say, I have yet to receive a postcard, but I do strongly feel his presence frequently. It's very easy for me to summon it up. Not in a ghostly figure sort of a way,
No,
but just
totally.
feeling a presence. A feeling of presence. and it's lovely. It really is lovely.
Let me circle back one last time, and then I want to change the subject to another subject. But was there something that scared you a lot growing up? Because here you had this change from being completely supported at camp to being completely isolated at home. Not completely isolated, obviously. Your dad was there. You went out for breakfast, but you felt the complete support of being with your friends in this 2 month situation, and then coming back. Was there something that scared you about being alone?
When I was younger, I never liked to be. I always needed to have somebody upstairs. My bedroom was upstairs. I needed to have somebody upstairs when I went to bed. They didn't have to be in the same room. They just needed to be upstairs.
Yeah.
So there was that the fear of being alone, I guess, on that level. That didn't last terribly long. But then later on, it would come, the fear that would rear its head every so often, which won't be any surprise to anybody, is the fear of abandonment, the fear of somebody leaving or dying that I loved. Again, not a like a real deep visceral fear, but it did come up every so often. Not so much anymore.
I had that very, very seriously because my mom and dad passed away on the same day, 2 years apart. So they passed away on July 4th when I was 13 and when I was 15. And when I was 17, my brother and I were hitchhiking across the United States. And we were in Denver, and we were trying to get a ride out to California. And this group of we called them back in those days greasers, but they were, just tough,
Right.
white guys. Maybe skinheads would be what they would call them today. Stopped the car and said, "Where are you guys going?" And we said, "Well, we're going to California." They said, "Well, get in. We'll give you a ride." And we just something didn't feel right about it. And while we were standing there, another car drove by, and the guy threw a bottle of beer at the car. And the car made a U-turn and said, who threw that bottle of beer? And they pointed to us and said, "These guys did."
Oh, jeez.
And so this was the evening of July 3rd, the same time when my mom and dad passed away. They passed away when the 3rd became the 4th on both of them. And I was 100% sure my brother was going to be taken that day.
Wow.
And that there was a plan in place that every 2 years we would be taken. So I understand that feeling really well. Let's bounce forward. You talk about a leap.
Yeah.
You talk about moving from this one ledge to another. Tell me about that leap.
So the framework of the radical leap is the framework that I teach. I've been teaching for quite some time. It's the title of my first book, The Radical Leap, which came out in its first edition in 2004.
Time out.
Yeah.
Do me a favor.
Yeah.
Tell it to me as if you've never told it to anybody before. Use different words. Don't tell it in the same way. Tell it in a completely different way than you've ever said it before.
Okay, so I'm gonna attempt this in Pig Latin.
Okay.
Iple isle.
I have a Pig Latin translator going with subtitles underneath you, so don't worry, you can do that.
I'm not fully bilingual, but I can muddle through. So LEAP. First of all, it's important to understand what LEAP stands for: love, energy, audacity, and proof. Cultivate love, generate energy, inspire audacity, provide proof. So where that came from was, I've been now in the work of leadership development in some form or another for 30 years. And I've worked with just about every kind of company, as you mentioned before, in just about every kind of industry, which means that I know nothing about anything, except the one thing that they all have in common, which is human beings, at least for now. So there came a time in my career when I had incredible mentors. I don't know if you remember Tom Peters.
Sure, of course.
So, I was vice president of Tom's company.
Oh, wow.
He's one of my mentors. Jim Kouzes, who is the co-author of the Leadership Challenge, hired me at the Tom Peters Company, and he's, a leadership guru. So I was surrounded by all these people, and I had all these, and I worked, with Tom and the gang all throughout the 90s, pretty much, and I had these incredible experiences with lots of clients, and learned a lot from really good leaders, and learned a lot from really bad leaders, and learned a lot from my mentors. But there came a point where I asked myself, given everything that I've learned, and by the way, I spent most of my time, or almost all of my time, facilitating and teaching around other people's work. Like Tom's work and Jim's work and all that. And I got really good at it, and I really loved doing it. But there came a point where I asked, well, what the hell do I think about all this?
Yeah.
Right? So based on everything that I've learned from my mentors, my clients, for this work in the trenches, metaphorically speaking, if I could make everybody understand something, if I could have everybody get it, what would it be? And in trying to answer that question, that's where that LEAP framework leaped out, that first and foremost, it's really all about love. That's what I'd seen over and over again. Sometimes I would hear the language used. Sometimes I would just see it described without it being labeled love. But it was love. And I, what teed me up with that was actually Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner's work in the Leadership Challenge. One of their practices, they call it encouraging the heart. And Jim used to quote some of the people that he looked up to as saying that, love is really the secret of life, and it's the secret to success. And Jim's own tagline to this day is love him and lead him. Wow. So that really influenced me. But what it did was it heightened my awareness of that thing, of that element, of that practice. And once I started looking for it, I saw it everywhere. And I said, why aren't we really putting this front and center? Because that's really the foundation for the whole thing. And it's about creating, an environment that people love working in, an experience that customers are going to love. It's about, it just seems so obvious to me. Yeah. So I saw that as the foundation, and then energy comes, it just grows out of that. If I love this, the energy comes out.
So do me a favor, let's pause for a minute.
Yeah. Sure.
Why do you think people, because as you say it now, it seems so absolutely simple.
Yeah, it is.
That's where it all evolves from, and that's where it all starts from. But why weren't people doing it? What have you found is the reason why people weren't doing it, or were they doing it and just not calling it that?
Yes, exactly. So people were definitely doing this. In other words, I didn't look at kind of, survey the scene and say, what's missing here? Love. There's no love in this damn business thing. That's not what it was. It was, what is it that makes the great leaders that I'd met? I'm not talking about historic leaders that I had no personal contact with. I'm talking about people that I met, that I worked with. What was it that made them so great? It was love. And for some of them, they would use the language, but like I said, for others of them, they just acted that way. So it's not really, for me, it wasn't about, I got to get people to start walking around and saying, I love you, man, and having a big group hug in the hallway. It was about saying, let's call this what it really is so that we can do it more intentionally, so that we can get better at it. Because unless we put some kind of construct around it, some kind of label on it, it's very hard to be consciously competent with it, right? There was a lot of unconscious competence going on, but I really wanted to bring it to the forefront. So I said, all right, I just got to start talking about it. And so in my speeches and my keynotes and all that, even way back when, I just started talking about it. And it was really kind of interesting because I'm speaking to business people. That's been my playground, right? Yeah. It wasn't like who is the Leo Buscaglia? Yeah, Buscaglia.
You weren't sweating and wiping yourself.
it wasn't that kind of crowd, right?
Right.
People were coming there to get hugs. People I was talking to were making money. They're trying to run a business.
Yeah.
So
So
I've had a lot.
hold on one
Yeah.
minute. So in the environment where people were coming to make money and people weren't coming to get sweat pushed onto them by Leo as he moved through the crowd, what did you find their initial response to be as you started talking about this love?
Yeah, surprisingly receptive.
So was it your thought that you had to overcome that they would not be, or did you have that thought, or was there a hesitation that you had to overcome that wasn't there?
Yeah, I think there was a little hesitation at first, but I knew a couple of things simultaneous to that hesitation. So the hesitation came from, are people going to dismiss me as, California touchy-feely hoo-ha crap? Right. But at the same time, I was coming from a place of very deep conviction on this, that this is my job. My job is to convey what I'm seeing, to convey what I'm learning about what makes business people, what makes great leaders great. So I felt like I had permission to do that. That's what people were hiring me to do, even though they didn't necessarily know the message they were going to hear. They just thought they were getting something on, leadership, your granddad's leadership model. So I was a little nervous at first, but I saw right away that people were receptive to it. And I think part of it, honestly, was because I'm a really good communicator, and I was able to make it concrete and not leave it as an abstraction. And also because of the package this message is coming in. I mean, I look like a football player. People they didn't expect it from me. I've had people tell me that many times over the years. I remember one guy in New York came up to me and he said, you started talking, and it took me a while to catch up, because I'm thinking to myself, this guy looks like a linebacker, and he's talking about love. What's going on here? I don't get it. So I think that gave me a bit of an advantage, because it wasn't as easy to dismiss me as one of those people. I just the packaging is incongruent with that.
Yeah. So let me try and understand. When you first introduced the concept of love, the way you saw it into the marketplace, was it that you have to love what you do? You have to have a passion for what you do. You have to love the products you create. You have to love, or it seems like, because that seems like a very palpable message to even a world of business people, as opposed
right.
As opposed to what we first hear when we think love is, come on, dudes, you got to love one another. Like, sit down and just, look at each other and love each other and find a way to resolve all your conflicts by just loving each other.
Everybody get together.
Right, gotta love one another.
Yeah. So you hit it right on the head. So here, I'll lay it out for you in 30 seconds. This is the whole business. I don't know if argument is the right word, but the case. The most important thing for any business is to create a product or service that their customers are going to love. Anything short of that, we don't have a competitive advantage. So it starts with that. And you got to back it up one more step. How do you create that for customers in a meaningful and sustainable way over time? By creating an environment or a culture that people love working in. If I don't love working here, it's very difficult for me to convey that to a customer. And I can't create that kind of culture or contribute to that kind of environment unless I love it and them and this myself first. That's it.
Love it.
Becomes very personal very quickly. But it starts with the so-called business case. That's why, I titled my new book, Love is Just Damn Good Business, for really one good reason. And that is, love is just damn good business. Yeah. And this is what I've been saying to people for so many years. And really all I did was quote myself and stuck it on a cover. But that's it. If any business person worth his or her salt understands that if all we're doing is satisfying customers, we have no future, because they can get satisfied anywhere. But as soon as somebody says, I love this place, which we use that language a lot when we talk about brands and products and services that we love. So why don't we pay attention to that language? Because they're telling us something. And that is that there's an emotional connection that we need to be able to create. But we can't create it unless it's authentic for us, which means we have to create that experience. And the teams, the people, great performing teams, I'm sure you see it in your conversations and the work that you do. If I talk to people on a team that's really just humming along, and I ask them, how do you like being on this team? They're going to tell me they love it. That's the word that they'll use. Oh, I love it. It's great. When I ask a leader about a company that they're growing and they're doing great work, not every time, but the vast majority of the time, tell me about your business. I love this business. I got great people. I love the people. I love the love. Right? You hear it all the time. But then you stick a microphone in front of them or shine a spotlight on them and say, tell me about your company. So they're great. Yeah. What happened to the love thing? So that's absolutely it, Danny. It's not, if I were to step out on stage and say, the most important thing you can do for your team is to love everybody, is to just let people know how much you love them. Okay, now turn to a partner and say the following words. I love you. Listen, that can work in personal development seminars, and I'm involved in groups that we have conversations that are exactly like that. Yeah. But in the business world, that is, at least coming out of the gate like that, sometimes you can get to that eventually. Yeah. But coming out of the gate like that is death. That's it. You alienate at least half the audience, and diminish. I would diminish my own credibility. But instead, if I can give example after example after example after example, and tie it to this, and cite, people aren't convinced by the research. The research is just a way to justify what they already know is true. But I can cite studies and all of that, but it's the examples and the stories. Yeah. So this is what I mean by love. For example. And then it's kind of hard to argue with. Then it's just a question of, do I want to do this or not?
Yeah. What's the biggest challenge in companies around love?
I think it's some kind of a cultural conditioning. That there's some conditioning that we're all subject to some degree or another that says love has no place in business. That there's something in us from our history that leads us to believe that love is something. It's a great thing, for your friends and family and all of that. But work is a purely rational endeavor, and it's not personal. It's just business. That kind of thing, which is just some shit that we made up. But I think it's ingrained in us. But it's less and less of a challenge, because in my experience, more and more people are kind of naturally glomming onto this conversation. But the other challenge is, even if I really believe that, what I have to be able to do is make the translation from that feeling, from a sentiment, into a practice and a discipline and a set of behavioral actions. Yeah. That's the biggest challenge for people, is what should this look like in the way that we do business? And that's a great deal of fun, helping people to sort that out.
I bet. I'm married to a woman who I think is one of the greatest lovers I've ever met, not in the sexual, but in the sense of she just loves beyond measure of anything that I've ever seen before. Obviously, she would have to be married to this guy. She's got to be deaf and dumb and blind, right? But it was interesting. A few months ago, we were having a conversation because she was trying to figure out how to take the commodity of love and make it something that was attractive to business. And the thought that came out of her mouth was, who's going to buy love? I mean, love isn't something a business is interested in. And I'm going to have her listen to this podcast, and I'm going to have her read your book, but what I hear you saying, and I want to try and be really clear on this. There's a love around the passion around what you do, and a love of sort of a hippie love of we got to love yourself, man, and then you got to love each other. And the passion of doing something you love in your mind, what I'm hearing you say, and I'm lobbing it over the net for you to either hit it out of the park or just say, that's totally wrong. When you get a group of people together who love what they do and work together building something that they love doing, they naturally develop love for each other and they naturally develop love of self. It's almost the opposite way of approaching the way sort of the California lovey-dovey community would say you got to love yourself first before you can love somebody else, before you can love what you do. Do you understand what I'm
Yeah, I sure do. Thanks for lobbing that one in right over the strike zone. So for one thing, I don't really care about the sequence. I don't care what happens first, as long as you get there.
Yeah.
And if you have to start with the customer and work it back inwards, the conclusion you end up with is, I really can't do any of this unless there's a good degree of self-love there, right? And for other people, it's like, I'm going to work on myself first, and then I'll expand that out into ever-growing concentric circles or whatever. Fine, whatever floats your boat. But here's the way I look at it. And this is the subtitle of the book, but more important, it's kind of the framework within the framework. And I'll tell you the story of where it came from in a second. But it's do what you love in the service of people who love what you do. Do what you love in the service of people who love what you do. And there are three distinct sections. The first one is doing what you love. That's the passion for your work. Well, we can't just leave it there. Because if all I'm doing is what I love, and I'm really passionate about this, and it's great, but I'm not serving anybody with it, then it's a vocation. I mean, it's an avocation, not a vocation. So in the service of people is the business context, the moral context, and the ethical context kind of wrapped in together. Yes, I'm doing what I love, but not to serve myself, to serve you. And you, the customer, you, the employee, you, my colleague, you, my family, you, my community, whatever it is. So if I'm doing what I love in the service of people, and I'm serving you not to fill some kind of a baseline obligation, but I want to serve you in a profound way so that it has an impact on you, then what happens is reciprocity. You love me in return. You love my company. You love being on my team. You love me as a person. And that's, when you have a client that raises their hand and says, I love you guys, that's the ideal client, and we want more of those. So it kind of comes full circle. Do what you love in the service of people who love what you do. So therefore, we can ask, to what degree am I doing what I love? To what degree am I serving people? And to what degree are the people I'm serving saying that they, experiencing that they love what I'm doing for them?
Love it. Very easy equation to follow. In the experience of the work that I do with people, and I'm going to set it up with a little story. When my parents passed away, I moved in with my aunt and uncle. My uncle was a household name internationally. My parents were lower middle class. And so I changed stratospheres, like on a 3-hour plane ride, I changed stratospheres. Suddenly I was friends with the kids of billionaires and sitting at tables with billionaires and enjoying conversation. I would meet their families, I would meet their parents, I would meet them. And that carried on for a long time. I still am friends with many of them. My best friend in those days, when I walked away from the opportunity to run my uncle's business, got so mad at me. And he said, I was looking forward to just having fun with you and doing, and just experiencing this life together and living in this arena. And you just gave it up to just find yourself. You just gave it up to sort of look for yourself. And I was so pissed at you, and I put you down so often. Every time I could, I put you down. And I found this out when I came up the elevator into the Mandarin Oriental, because the Mandarin Oriental in New York, the elevator to the rooms is on the 34th floor. So I was coming up into the elevator, going to the 34th floor to go to my room. And as I'm walking out of the elevator, this guy who I hadn't seen in 30 years is walking in. He didn't recognize me. I looked at him and I said, Neil? And he said, how do you know my name? I said, you don't recognize me, do you? He said, no, I have no idea who you are. I said, this is Danny. We were best friends when we were 15 years old. Do you remember? He literally, his face dropped. He said, Danny, what are you doing? We're going to a club. Come on, turn around. Let's come with us. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that with you, but maybe we can have breakfast tomorrow. He said, screw the club. I've got a bottle of scotch and a couple cigars up in my room. I'll meet you in the lobby here in 5 minutes. We sat from about 10:30 at night until 4:30 in the morning. What he said to me was, I have more money than God. I run businesses. I lead successful ventures. People love working for me. But I haven't known a minute of happiness in my life. My kids don't talk to me. I'm on my 7th wife. I looked into your eyes as I was coming back down here, and I realized how much fun I made of you and how sorry I am for that now. Because I see you have something that I've always wanted my whole life, is this feeling of contentment and peace. And I said, Neil, it's not too late. We can, I'll sit with you. I'll help you have it. That was 10 years ago, and I haven't heard from him since.
Yeah.
Do you find that people, like, your whole story makes a lot of sense until I see the peace that I see in executives and board people and those boardrooms that I go into, where people have no idea who they are. They have no idea how to have a relationship with themselves. They might have a good situation in the situations of leading other people, but they don't have horizontal relationships. They have vertical relationships, and as long as they're vertical, either up or down, as long as they're teaching or learning from, they're probably fine. But in the horizontalness of relationships, they don't have much of that, because there's a fear there. Do you find that in the work?
Yeah, absolutely. So, to be clear, and to your example, you don't need love to make a lot of money. You can make all kinds of money and be, from every objective outside measurement, successful, quote unquote, and be miserable in the process. I cannot prove this, but I would say that the mistake that people make is that it's a simple causation versus correlation, confusing one with the other. In other words, they think, well, this is why I made so much money, is because I've sacrificed everything else in my life to do it. And I would suggest, and this is the part that I can't prove, that they would be even more successful on every measure had they just shifted their priorities, and if they could do that now. But I think the fear is that Marshall Goldsmith wrote a book a while ago called "What Got You Here Won't Get You There," which is a great title. But I think that's what happens a lot of times, is people think they think that there's a certain set of circumstances that got me here, and I'm afraid that if I give that up now, I won't. I'm still ambitious. I still want to accomplish things, but my fear is I don't want to let go of that, because I know that, and I believe that it got me here. Yeah. Well, even if it did get you there, it's not going to get you to the next level, right? But more likely for most people, that's not what got you there. Yeah. It's a belief that that's what you had to do, but that's not really what got you there. How can any life be less successful with more joy and happiness in it? It doesn't make any sense.
No. I love
there's just some people that don't believe that they can achieve it, or are afraid to try it.
And what I would say is what got them there is innovative practices. And in the thought of I'm scared to leave this place where I no longer innovate, that's what gets them stuck where they are, and they can continue down that road, but it's not going to. Innovation doesn't come from not innovating. It comes from innovating.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Steve Jobs is a great example of that, right? I mean, he's there's no question that he loved Apple. He loved the technology. He loved the work that he did. He told people that they need to fall in love with their work. When you talk to people that worked for Steve Jobs, they didn't love working for him.
Yeah.
And the thing is that what made him so incredibly successful is his incredible genius. We can't, the rest of us, we can't replicate that, right? So again, I can't prove this, but I believe that Jobs, he accomplished what he was able to accomplish in spite of that lack of love among the team.
And yet
But
he
but
had,
his
and yet he
brilliance
had,
was so great that trumped everything else.
and yet he had an Indian guru that he followed. The only book that he had in his iPad was a book called Autobiography of a Yogi about a teacher from India who was all love. So he had that feeling of wanting to be love and wanting to feel that. Let me honor your time because I love you. You know, you're close by. I'd love to go out when we can have a dinner or coffee or
That
something
will be
together,
fun.
a beer
Yeah.
together, whatever it would be. Um, this is a question I ask everybody in closing. Is this the world you always dreamed of handing over to your kids and your grandkids?
This greater world that we're talking about that we're living in.
Yeah.
Can I say fuck no? Is that all
You
right?
could say it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No.
So,
Um, no.
the follow up to that is,
Yeah.
momentum has a certain way of walking on its own. And the longer we let the momentum of the world go in the way that it's going, the longer the momentum builds and it's harder to stop that momentum. What would be one thing that you would suggest to people right now that they could do right this minute
Yeah.
that would allow the momentum of that to change to create the world that we do want to hand over to our grandkids?
I think it's a couple of elements to that. One is recognizing that leadership is an opportunity that's open to all of us. It's not about position or title. You don't have to be an elected official to lead in the world. You can lead from wherever you are. And to build on that, I really believe that this is the great opportunity for businesses, because a business is really it's a microcosm of society. It's a small society, right? And if you think about an ideal work environment, we're bringing people together with different political points of view, different religious backgrounds, different philosophies, different ethnicities, different gender identification, and we're all coming together to accomplish whatever that business is trying to do.
Yeah.
And it gives us, therefore, an environment that I think makes it easier for us to transcend our differences and focus on something in common and be able to celebrate each other in a different context. And if we can do that right, then what we can do is present a model to the rest of the world that says, you know what, this is possible. Here's how we're doing it here. Now granted, living in a democratic society, for example, where we elect people and all of that is very different from what happens when you go to work, where you don't elect your boss. But the deeper dynamics of the interpersonal human connection is something that we can emulate for the rest of the world at large to learn from. So I'm a big believer in start in your own neighborhood, however you define that. Change your piece of the world, small w world, for the better, and all that does add up. And as an eternal optimist, I believe that it will. I just don't know how long it's going to take.
Yeah.
But I'm rooting for shorter. I'm rooting for sooner rather than later.
I think you got a lot of people in your rootin' alley there that will be with you. Steve, I want to thank you so much for coming on to the show. We're going to have all your information in the show notes. But is there one particular way you would want people to get in touch with you from all the things that we're going to mention?
Sure. If you can remember my name, you can find me anywhere. So stevefarber.com, social media, you'll see it in the show notes. If you, there is that, loveisgoodbiz.com, where there's an assessment, a self-assessment built around LEAP that we were talking about here today. And you'll get a, personalized report and some really good content. So that's a good place. But, reach out to me and I'll reach back. That's kind of how I do.
Thank you so much for being here. For those of you who listen to the show regularly, thank you so much for listening. The way things grow is when people like something, they share it with people that they like. So if you like the show, share it with people you like and let them share it with people they like and let them share it with people that they like. There are touch moments in every person's life where we think we're going down the road a certain way. And there's a moment in time where just everything suddenly changes. What would happen for you if this was one of those moments? What would happen to you if, in listening to Steve, you brought more emphasis on love in the businesses that you have, in the families that you're in? Just loving what you do, loving the things that you do, loving how you do what you do. What would that do to your life right now if you could have the opportunity to do that? How would that influence the people you work with? How would that influence the people that run your companies? How would that influence the people that pick up your laundry and make your products? How would it feel that if you just were to love what you do so much that it was contagious when you walked into a room, people started to love what they did as well? That's the power of what love can do. That's the power of what your love can do by just simply loving and being passionate about the life that you have. It's time for that now. Thank you again, Steve. Is there one last thing you want to say before we exit?
It's been a great pleasure, Danny. I really appreciate the thoughtfulness with which you ask your questions. And this was a very unique conversation, and I'm thrilled to have been a part of it.
Thank you. Most people that come on my show said they don't normally get these types of questions, and they always feel it's like a unique. So I appreciate you for taking the risk with me and coming on. It's been an absolute honor to have you. Again, that's stevefarber.com, extremeleadership.com. All of his social media links are in the show notes here. And make sure you go to the link that's here where you can get a personalized loveisgoodbusiness.com, where you can take a personalized assessment to see where you stand. Thank you again, everybody, for being here. Until next conversation, stay connected, stay happy, stay kind, and for God's sake, fall in love with the life you're living. Ciao.